Well, if you're staying up to date on Twitter, following WDW Pro 1 over there, and you've probably seen him release his first few videos on Twitter, as well as a few new leaks. And one of those came out earlier today, or by the time you're seeing this, yesterday, over on Twitter. And we're going to talk about that more right now. Looking like Harry Potter could be the next thing to get rebooted, as DC and everything else over at Warner Brothers looks to be getting a fresh perspective here from David Zaslav. Now, whether or not that's going to be a good or bad thing is yet to be seen, although I understand a lot of folks out there would have some serious trepidations considering the recent history of reboots. But let's talk about it. And right now, to do that, I'm going to bring in WDW Pro from thatparkplace.com.
Renegade Online.
Merry Christmas, Mr. Renegade. How are you today? This is not what we had anticipated doing and having ready for Christmas Eve.
Yeah, no, it really wasn't. And we talked about this earlier this afternoon, and I said, okay, yeah, this is interesting enough. You know, let's kind of dive into this and see which what. So communication from a source and some information that we've been talking about here. So why don't you tell the folks, fill them in a little bit if they didn't see the Twitter post. What's going on here?
So basically, we're being very careful with this information and the source that's providing it. The reason for that is because this is hot stuff. It is, I mean, as far as I know, we are exclusively delivering this information. And we need to go ahead and say, ahead of everything else that we're going to talk about, that because this is so early in the game and because this is coming from a single source providing it to us, although, you know, we wouldn't be bringing it to you unless we thought it was serious, it still goes into the rumor category. So everything in this video today is going to be rumor or speculation. That said, check the track record and see if you want to believe it or not. And we're going to try and bring some gravitas to it as we deal with it. But essentially, what this comes down to is that we have been given information that not only is the DC cinematic universe at Warner Brothers Discovery receiving a reboot in the future, but also it now seems extremely likely that the Harry Potter universe, which is, I think, internally maybe being called the Wizarding Division, that it is receiving a reboot in the future in terms of the movies. And that may also include recasting some of the roles that have become iconic inside the Harry Potter universe with the major actors and characters. We're not talking about fantastical beasts. We're not talking about some of these ancillary Harry Potter things. We're talking about what is referred to inside the industry as core Harry Potter.
Yeah, the OG stuff. And I think that's key for people to realize here, is that what we're hearing is one of the things that, and this is not to say necessarily it's a done deal at this point, but this is something that apparently is under serious enough consideration that it is being discussed quite fervently inside Warner Brothers right now for this. And that is that you're looking at that original cast, Harry, Hermione, Ron, new cast starting over, because, you know, they feel like perhaps the original Harry Potter fandom is kind of aging out, and they want to revitalize or refresh this or make something new to drive new audiences to theaters. Now, one of the things I found interesting, and on the surface it makes a lot of sense, although that has yet to be done with terribly much success in Hollywood up to this point. Usually because they kind of phone these reboots in, and they're usually done very poorly. So if I think Warner Brothers goes down this road, obviously they need to treat this very carefully. But that being said, one of the things I find interesting is that the Harry Potter toys, the merchandise, the shirts, the books, no matter how many times they remake these things, no matter how many times they come out with new editions, of any of that stuff I just mentioned, they sell like hotcakes. They still do very, very well. There's still big Harry Potter sections when you go to certain bookstores and places like Second and Charles, all these kind of different things. And it seems like, you know, we've kind of heard the same thing from the industry side, that is the case. And it's much bigger than anything Disney has with Star Wars, for example, right now. Significantly bigger.
And that's despite Harry Potter having been, well, from the standpoint of the OG stuff, the core Harry Potter stuff, I mean, it's a dormant franchise. And so that's particularly why we're being told that in the next 3 to 5 years, they're looking to reboot this thing, is because all the other stuff inside this Potter universe, inside of this wizarding division at Warner Brothers Discovery, it's not taking off the way that they need to in order to sustain the franchise. And they have far too much invested in the franchise for it to become dormant or secondary. They want it to be a very strong evergreen property. And by that, we mean that it's selling all the time, that it's always at the top of mind of consumers. Mm-hmm. And because they have not been able to get the other stuff, these sort of secondary things off the ground and gain that momentum like they have with the originals, the thinking that they have is that it's time for Hollywood to get over this fear of recasting. And so they're ready to do that. Now, here's a caveat. Mm-hmm. We're talking about 3 to 5 years out. And,
right.
And you and I are looking at this from the business side. People watching this video might not understand. They might think that, we're talking about this from a fan's perspective, or we're talking about it from the perspective of looking at scripts or what should happen in terms of how they reboot it. We don't know how they're going to reboot it, because we're so far out and we're bringing this information new. But what we do know is the economics behind it. We know what's driving their decision-making process as they get ready to do it, even if we don't know the details of the fiction and how they're going to address all of these concerns. And I'll tell you, Valliant, you know, in announcing this, one of the things that I discovered is how many people are deeply concerned that if they do this, that it will become a woke franchise.
Right.
And I don't know, can you speak to what level, what degree of power JK Rowling would still have and how that relationship would work? Because this gets really messy there, but it goes to the heart of just how much they need this franchise to be rebirthed, that they would be willing to go through some of these hurdles that are ahead for them.
Right. Well, I think there's two parts to this. The first part of what you said is the first test to see whether or not the wokey woke crowd that screams about everything on Twitter, or that used to have free reign on Twitter but clearly no longer do anymore. Hogwarts Legacy. Big video game coming out here just a couple of months from now. I'm actually interested in seeing this. I've actually considered getting a PS5 sooner than I had planned to. I was waiting for Final Fantasy 16 next summer. But I may actually dive in to try out Hogwarts Legacy. It looks like a great game. Now, of course, this game has caught a lot of flack from that side because of comments that Rowling has made in support of women. As crazy as that sounds, but that's where we are. They didn't like some of the things that Rowling said, and therefore they wanted to boycott this video game. They wanted everybody to boycott this game. That's not happening. This game looks like it's going to have one of the biggest and most successful launches in recent video game history. I think this is going to be a huge deal for Warner Brothers and their video games, and that part of the studio that I think it's tied to as well as for JK Rowling. So with that in mind, if they were to reboot these movies, I think they will have already had their answer on, we have to appease certain crowds by recasting these classic characters in a way other than what they were in the books. This is where Hollywood tends to really love to screw up these days, is doing this to virtue signal. And then what you typically wind up doing is driving away like the classic fans that would pay money for this new product. It just kind of turns them off. They see it for what it is just an empty, ridiculous virtue signal. And we don't need to go through the laundry list of problems that Hollywood has had with that in the last just 2 years alone. But it does put Warner Brothers in a position to where if they can make it very successful, they have successful video games, they continue to have successful merchandise, and then they have a successful new Harry Potter something. Could be a complete reboot, could be something totally different. I even suggested, why not use Hogwarts Legacy as kind of the basis for it? Take the original cast members, cast them as different actors in the 19th century Hogwarts castle like the video game is based on. Or make Daniel Radcliffe playing James Potter 20, 30 years earlier. All these things Warner Brothers could do. And then if they also have a successful DC franchise at the same time that's being rebooted, it might make them very attractive at that point, 5+ years from now, for a purchase by another large conglomerate.
Now, Val, you make some great points there. One of the things that the source says is that they're using this upcoming Harry Potter game as a barometer to sort of gauge exactly what fans are wanting out of this franchise. And so that's an excellent point. The other thing that you do, I think it's just phenomenally well, is reminding everybody, including myself, that the way that they reboot this franchise does not have to be your standard fare reboot where we go back to the origin of the characters we've already had an adventure with.
Yeah.
There are many different ways that they could do that, and we're not here to tell you that we know what that is yet. They're not even close, I would think, to being at that point. In fact, according to the source, they don't have sort of the James Gunn individual yet in charge of this.
Right.
That's part of what they're aiming for.
Very preliminary from what it sounds like.
Yes, but so although it's preliminary, what we do know is that, well, what is being alleged at this time is that the machinery, the wheels that take place at the beginning of one of these projects, that those parts are beginning to spin, and that the company is beginning to put the pieces together so that they can start to go in this direction. Let's say we'll leave it there. Like I said, this is really spicy, and this is, as far as I know, exclusively first here on the Valliant Renegade YouTube channel. But now you talked about Warner Brothers Discovery and the potential for it being sold in the future, and I think that's something worth investigating, because it seems to me that they are rebooting the DC universe. Now we're being told that they're looking to reboot the Harry Potter franchise. And so I'm just curious if they're successful in doing these two things and turning these back into solid evergreen IPs that all the third parties can be ecstatic about. And from what we're told, by the way, Warner Brothers Discovery is a better third-party partner with these companies than the Walt Disney Company. I mean, some of these companies out there
huh?
really, they really enjoy working with them. In fact, one of the examples we've been given is that when it comes to some of the older superhero movies, that when it comes to sharing ideas with their third parties, that they're actually open to ideas and criticisms and suggestions for implementing toys and all that kind of stuff. But so going forward, who out there could buy Warner Brothers Discovery if that's the play they're making? If their play is to increase the value of the company, what do you think? What's the path forward for them in that way?
There's been a lot of speculation on that here just in the last few months since Zaslav took over. I mean, there was even articles out there in some pretty big trade publications, and not just Hollywood trades, but some financial trades too, that picked up on it and had the wheels turning, right? That Zaslav was going to sell this in like 2 years. I'm like, no, highly, highly unlikely, and the main reason is that it's going to be way longer than 2 years before Zaslav is really able to right this ship. And that's not just fixing a lot of the debt issues that were inherited from the Reverse Morris Trust spinoff from AT&T and then in with David Zaslav's Discovery. There's a lot of things going on. We've talked about many of them, all the big write-downs, canceling movies like Batgirl and all this other kind of stuff. And there'll be more to come, I think, as time goes on. But in 5 years from now, or, after this alleged 3 to 5 years from now when they start rebooting Harry Potter, if this is where they're going, you might look 5 to 7 years down the road, when things would really be heating up at that point with new DC, hopefully, and then Harry Potter perhaps at that point as well. That could be a different story than today, or even a year or 2 years from now with some of these rumors from a few months ago, which Zaslav effectively debunked almost immediately. But The issue here is they could do that, or they could also just ride the tidal wave themselves. I mean, if they're really that successful, they'd be making a ton of money. Because here's the problem, Pro. It's like you said, who could actually really buy them? It's not just Warner Brothers Studios in DC and Harry Potter, or throw in Lord of the Rings as well. They still have the movie rights to that. It's also a matter of this massive network of cable stations that they have, not just HBO, but as we've talked before, you can go pull up the list of Warner Brothers family of channels. There's like 30 cable stations in there. If somebody like a Universal Comcast steps in or a Disney steps in trying to acquire it, not saying that they would, but I'm saying let's pretend it's one of those other two, probably would likely trigger an antitrust investigation. The FTC would step in. I mean, you would have a massive television powerhouse that just has absolutely no rival whatsoever. It might be more likely that you'd see somebody like an Apple step in that has effectively no exposure in that market. Perhaps an Amazon that has really no exposure in that market. They have streaming services, those two, but really nothing else to speak of. They don't have a broadcast television station. They don't have a bunch of linear delivery cable channels that are out there like everybody else does. Paramount certainly wouldn't be in any kind of financial position at that point to do it, and not to say that Comcast would either, or that they would want to. It would have to be somebody that's absolutely gargantuan and cash rich at that point. And the market for those types of companies are shrinking. We're seeing now, they're talking about what is Disney going to do going forward. We've seen rumors again. We've seen people starting to re-spark the debate about Disney getting rid of ESPN. And on that note, I just want to caution people, they're not really going to sell it. They're talking about, they're investigating spinning it off, meaning making its own corporate entity separately, from the Disney company, but Disney would still own the majority stake in ESPN, believe me. So they're not really getting rid of it. They may do something, they could do something like that. Time will tell. But it's way too early in the game at this point to figure that one out. But let's see where this goes. They have to make it a success first, though, Pro. That's the key. They can't just restart it, and then if it winds up being another Fantastic Beasts type dud, it's not going to do them any favors. It's got
that achieves nothing.
Right, exactly. Fantastic Beasts has achieved nothing for them. I mean, the movies just weren't that good. People largely were not apparently interested in watching what was going on in America in the wizarding world because they don't think of that, right? They think of, and this is what I love about going back to Hogwarts Legacy. I think it's a fascinating era of classic 19th century London, the UK, that Jack the Ripper era. There's all kind of stuff you could do in that era of London is so fascinating. And that's where that game is gonna land. If they do something like that in a film, I'd go see it. I'd absolutely go watch it. I think that would be cool. I think that'd be great. Go to a different era, or like I said, use the classic characters or use the classic actors like Daniel Radcliffe and have him play James Potter. Go back 20, 30 years.
Those are all great points. What we're hearing that is sort of the internal dialogue out of the major players inside of this, this push, is that they're sort of under pressure right now, and that pressure is coming from they've got a Harry Potter franchise. How do you keep the Harry Potter franchise vibrant if you don't have Harry Potter?
Exactly.
You have to have Harry Potter to keep going with Harry Potter. And
Pro, that's funny real quick because it's kind of like trying to do Star Wars without Skywalkers.
Well, that's
I don't know if they've ever tried that, but I don't know if that would work. Maybe Disney will try that one day.
Shocker, yeah. You might want to get the key players in your franchise together again. But with the Harry Potter thing, so think about these pressures they have. They need to have Harry in the Harry Potter franchise, and they need to create new content around this character because it drives everything, including merchandise, including gamings, just everything. Well, and then you've got the theme park investments, which are massive. But then also they have some other pressures being applied to them. And those pressures are that you only have a certain shelf life for any idea, any concept. And so like you're saying, it needs to be repackaged in some way to re-up the shelf life. Everybody can think about some of their favorite characters, and every time that you get a new iteration of those characters, they get a redesign. Why do they get a redesign? It's not because they want to change the look of the characters for the sake of changing the look of the characters.
Mhm.
They do it because they need to differentiate the new toy lines from the old toy lines, or they need to differentiate between one generation and another generation, because you want to hook the kids on whatever you're creating now. At the same time, you're using the nostalgia of what their parents potentially watched. So you might think of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for example. They don't look like they did in the 80s. And there's constantly a new version of that. You might think of the Power Rangers, right? So the Power Rangers don't stay the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. There's always some new like dino-themed thing or some other new theme, because they constantly have to keep this shelf life repeating to something new. Now, and this came up in Midnight's Edge the other day. There is a nostalgia shelf life as well. And so I think that's another one of the pressures that Warner Brothers Discovery is looking at, is how long can we play on this Harry Potter nostalgia before that begins to diminish? They want to hit it at the height of it, not come in after it's already gone.
Right. No, you've got to keep the ball rolling. And I think, look, to that end, the perfect solution, hey, Warner Brothers, $1 million idea right here. I could give you away right now to accomplish both things. Just like Pro said, you want to keep the nostalgia. We need to pay homage to the original characters, but we want to bring in younger versions of them to make them new again for a new generation. Do what guys like me talked about years ago when the first franchise ended. Go into Harry's adult life as an Auror. You can bring back Daniel Radcliffe if he'll do it. Bring back Emma Watson. Bring back Rupert Grint. They're all still out there. Rupert Grint's on. Bring them all back.
Get your blank checks ready over there, Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
It's going to cost you a little bit, but it's worth it. It's worth it. I mean, the third parties are screaming for it.
Bring them all back. Create a new story, a new big enemy, but then tie it back in to the original Harry Potter stuff. And then you can cast new, younger versions of Ron, Harry, and Hermione to work into that movie, like for flashbacks or something. I mean, I know it'd be a little weird, but if you really want to recast it, and I'm trying to come up with a way for them to recast it. There's ways to do this, but still keeping the original actors in their original roles, because I think that's the most important thing. I think it's going to be really hard. Like, you might bring in some new people, don't get me wrong, but the folks like me, hey, we're not that old. We're in our 40s. And 30s in many cases, in some cases younger, that grew up with Harry Potter in the movies. And it's like, I don't need to watch the same 7 books be turned into films again. I mean, it's not like the films were that long ago. It's not like they were devoid of any amazing special effects. They were rife with it. Could they be a slight bit better here and there with today's technology? Maybe. But is it enough? In my opinion, not really. They're going to have to come up with something totally different. But that's just me. But this is all in the early planning stages. But when we talked about this earlier today, and you showed me the actual communication, I'm not really surprised. And it's funny, I even mentioned this to Mrs. Renegade, and she who's a huge Harry Potter fan. Huge. Her reaction was, figured it was coming.
And there's one more thing too that I've been thinking about as you've been talking, and I haven't spoken to you about this, but you were talking about the need to keep this thing going and the need to keep it alive. Just look at what Disney is currently doing with the Santa Clauses, right?
Right.
So we've heard reports out of that because they brought that back, maybe it's not the ratings darling that they had hoped. Maybe the quality of the show isn't fantastic. It doesn't matter. It revitalized all of the old Santa Claus movies starring Tim Allen. It revitalized them. Guess what? Disney's getting crazy viewership in December off of those movies. They didn't have to make a new movie. They just had to make one show that brought back the ratings for all those other movies. And if you're Warner Brothers Discovery, you've got to be saying to yourself, we've got one of the biggest franchises out there. We certainly have one of the biggest fantasy franchises out there. We have one of the most beloved franchises out there, and it's withering on the vine. And then they're looking at the statistics. Okay, this is what's coming from the source. They're looking at the statistics that you and I don't have, but they do. And that is that when they divide the franchise into 2 parts, the core Harry Potter stuff, like you're talking about the OG, the movies, and then they divide it to the other stuff, all of their metrics are like black and white. When it comes to the OG stuff, it is beloved by the fans. even though they're not pumping out anything related to that, it's still the source talks about the wands. People, they love this stuff.
Yep.
And then they look at the new stuff, the new things they have been trying, the spin-offs, and they're getting no traction at all. So absolutely, they're looking at this and saying, we want the Santa Claus's effect. We want the Hocus Pocus 2 effect. Mm-hmm. We want to see all of this other stuff revitalized by going back and redoing what the fans love.
Yeah, I think the core it revolves around is Hogwarts itself. It's the kids, right? It's the 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, the students of Hogwarts. Okay? That is what is selling. That's why it's Hogwarts Legacy, the video game. There's the Potter clan isn't there. This is 150 years or whatever, 200 years, about 150 years, I guess, before Harry Potter in that time. But it's at Hogwarts. You've got Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, Slytherin. You've got the castle. You've got. That's the magic of the books and the films. There's scenes in there with
the theme park stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's all tied in.
It's this idea of role playing. You're exactly right, Valliant. You've nailed it. It's the idea. So what's driving the people on this?
That's why the
yourself
the
in that
Scamander
age
stuff didn't work. Sorry.
Right, because they're role playing themselves in that age, role playing in these people group categories that the divisions of Hogwarts creates, right? And that's what's driving it. This other stuff isn't there. People don't care that much about it. But reliving sort of a magical high school experience is what drives this idea.
Mm-hmm. Look at. We keep using examples. Look at Andor. What did everybody say about Andor? Great show. The writing was great. Boy, it's so serious. Viewership sucked. It didn't have the same draw and the same type of pull, the magic that classic Star Wars was. It didn't. It doesn't mean it's a bad story, but it commercially, it just didn't work. It's the same thing with the whole Fantastic Beasts series. Might be some fun stories for some folks, but commercially, it just wasn't viable. Not for what they spent. And the same thing here. I think if they make the same mistake, getting away from the core elements of what made Harry Potter so big, and that was the kids in that school, that's what you need. You got to go back to that.
Yeah, and we wouldn't be bringing this to everybody, especially not on Christmas Eve, unless we really thought there was something to this. I mean, we're going out on a limb with this kind of thing. This is a huge leak if it's true. Yeah. I mean, it's huge. The idea that they would do this, that they would reboot the franchise. But that's what it looks like to us. Like Valliant said, I have shared the communications with him. And again, we're being very careful. Just know we're not talking about everything that we do know, and we're not going to.
Yeah, we can't.
We're being very careful here. So
yes, there's always a little more out there that we see that we just can't share, like Pro said, and that's just out of respect for those that pass us the information. But as always, we wouldn't come to bat with something like this if we did not have a fairly high degree of confidence in the information that we were being given. So
I guess we say Merry Christmas. You're welcome, everybody. If we,
Indeed.
What a fun surprise for the holidays.
Indeed. Well, Pro, thanks for joining us tonight. Everybody out there, make sure you're following along at WDW Pro 1 on Twitter and Pro's new channel, which is already well past 1,000 subs. I think 1,200 now, if I'm not mistaken, over on YouTube. Because in about a week from the time that you're watching this video, you're going to see the very first WDW Pro video on his very own channel. Of course, we will leave a link to that channel in the description of this video, so make sure you check that out. Head over there, follow Pro on Twitter, follow Pro on YouTube. Thank you all for being here. Have a very Merry Christmas, and until next time, take care.